consumer is one that is not warmly embraced, let me put it that way. But I'd like to hear from my colleagues at more traditional institutions to comment on that.
That's changing. Certainly, you know, that with a traditional tenured-based faculty with grounds-based processes and procedures, you run into some of the ways of doing things that are much more traditional than the current situation demands. That's why at Virginia Tech we've broken some of that out, particularly in our distance learning. And we have a new business model, or we've had a business model for several years now, for distance learning in our graduate programs that looks at things differently. While we still have our grounds operations working, the distance learning programming, we set aside that tuition just for those online students, from those online students in online programs. And we put that tuition in where it has to cover the direct and indirect costs. And that's very different from the rest of the university. Traditional, particularly traditional state universities or state-supported universities, the funds go into one pot and distribute out. For our online programs at Virginia Tech at the graduate level, we separate those out. And then we cover direct, indirect costs, and then if there's a surplus, which for the last 6 years that we've been using this model, there has been, we reinvest that surplus in. It goes back to the colleges for revamping their programs, and even can be used for some of their on-campus efforts. Part of it goes to the operational cost of the distance learning unit, our Institute for Distance and Distributed Learning at Virginia Tech. And then a portion of it, 1/3 of it, the surplus actually goes into professional and course development. So we fund course development for faculty buying out release time to generate new courses that then to sustain the program. So this business model is working very well for us in that we're sustaining it even in a time of significant economic downturn at a state level, because we're not taking our seed money and just cutting that, but we're maintaining. So I think we're continuing to grow. We've seen a 17% increase in e-learning enrollment from last fall to this fall, just in unduplicated head count. And so there's new ways of thinking that we're learning from the for-profits and the not-for-profits, for sure. And it is a challenge in terms of moving away from the traditional grounds-based approach to a new online model.
Well, if an organization, though, is ramping up to go into the distance learning world and is not changing their business model, do you think they can be successfully competitive, or do we all need to look at making a change in how we approach this new student in the new environment?
From my perspective, we need to change. It's only going to get you so far doing the way you've done things. And you know, institutions are different, but there's a lot of commonality out there in terms of who the students are and what the students' needs are and what the student demands these days. So I think an institution that's moving from grounds-based to online needs to look at their structure and then learn from others in terms of new ways to implement things. The old ways are only going to take you so far, and then you're not going to be able to operate in an environment that the student demands and requires if you're using grounds-based processes and procedures and the way you do things. So I think there can be a marriage of new ways to do things and the grounds-based, particularly for traditional institutions that are not going to move away from grounds-based education.
Yeah. The traditional education institutions, I think, have a more difficult time making that change. The newer institutions have set up to for a new business model that addresses that new student and that new model. And those that have to make a change, it is more difficult because you've got the legacy system that you have to bring along, and there are a lot of people that are very invested in where we've been, and how do you make that change. And the for-profits, I know, can say, this is where we're going, this is how we need to set up, this is how we need to spend our money, this is how we need to market, this is how we need to organize ourselves, and I think they've got a lot a chance to make faster progress. But for those of us that have been with the traditional institutions, there are real challenges in front of us. But I would agree, if we don't change, we may, 10 years from now, be very sorry that we weren't making those appropriate changes. So speaking of the various models, though, to what degree are the distance education programs centralized or decentralized? Is there a preferred model? And what are the pros and cons of those models?
Well, I can speak on behalf of Ashford. We have a campus in Iowa, but we also have student support in San Diego, California. What we found is that managing growth, and I think this is a challenge of traditional ed, especially as you venture into the distance, learning realm and delivering courses that way, is that growth is almost inevitable. But if you don't manage it, you're worse off than if you never grew in the first place. And I think one of the business model for most for-profits, and Stacey, you certainly can chime in as well, but we've developed a model that is scalable. And so there are ratios for every aspect of the university. We know if we have so many students, we need so much student support, so many student representatives, academic advisors, registrar's assistants, financial aid advisors, et cetera, et cetera. So all of those numbers are set, and we know they work. And consequently, managing growth really almost becomes a human resource issue. Hiring the right people at the right rate, because we know exactly what those ratios are.
And I would add to that, too, a centralized system allows you to have benchmarks for quality and for efficiency and for costs that you can measure over time. And so you can predict the kind of product or course or experience that you're putting out at the end for the student, and thus makes all students have a higher quality experience.
At Virginia Tech, about 11 years ago, we established a centralized distance learning unit to provide support. And that's worked very well, if nothing else, just for the economies of scale, as opposed to having 8 colleges out there trying to do their own individual things. We can provide a centralized faculty development, faculty support, registration, enrollment services for our distance learners, and it provides the same message, it provides the same quality in course, the same metrics that we look at across the university. So each institution is a little different, but from my perspective, certainly a centralized one, even in a traditional university, brings significant economies of scale and sets these metrics that are important to ensure quality education.
I can agree that we had to reorganize in Dallas. We've created what is the Dallas Telecollege, and it really is a centralized portal for all the distance learning classes, so that students that are coming in and looking for distance learning courses are not having to go to 7 different colleges, but they can go to one location, and then we work on behalf of all of our colleges. So the centralized approach for marketing has worked well. We need to continue carrying it forth with student services and all the other support, and we're working on that as we go. But Stacey's been talking about faculty a lot. How do you hire your faculty? Are they all in one location? Are they throughout the country? And how is that working?
Well, Capella University has about 1,200 faculty, and they are across the country and some even in other countries. We support them with a centralized model. We have orientation, it's required as we bring them in, and then support them through their first experiences teaching. We do have benchmarks for performance for faculty, and we measure those, and we support them through the management in their departments with their chairpersons and through their peers and communities of practice. Our adjunct population is about 85% right now, and we are examining different models for how we can commit to our faculty and different employment models. But ultimately, 85% of our faculty are part-time and disparate, and so we do have that challenge. And although we've improved, and I'm sure that all institutions are working on that, especially as part-time adjunct populations rise, the areas that I think that we still have to work on are making sure that we're communicating expectations to faculty, that we can share with them how their performance makes a difference in the students' outcomes and the students' satisfaction, and having more community building with that desperate faculty. So there's a lot of room to grow there as we learn and as we help support our faculty from a distance. But you know, putting a system in place, I think, is the